Welcome to the Think Fitness Life podcast, where the mind and gym come together to help you live your best life. Hosted by two fitness professionals and your personal trainers, Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie. Is this thing on? Just kidding, it is. And we're back. Eric and I doing some episodes, throwing some interviews in there with you guys. But we just can't keep ourselves away from the microphone because we love talking about health and fitness and this whole field. So this week we brought three topics that we felt we were having a lot of conversations with different clients and members, and we just think that this information is valuable to people. So we hope that you get something out of it. Before we get going, the weekly workout is going to be themed based upon some of our topics. So our topics today are bilateral versus unilateral workouts, conditioning, and eating on the go. So because we're talking about bilateral versus unilateral workouts, the weekly workout is a superset series where the first one is a back squat superset into walking lunges. I'd recommend like a 4x5 on the back squat and a 4x8 to 10 on each leg for the walking lunges. You can go body weight if you're going weighted for the back squat, or vice versa, right? If you want to go work on your body weight squats and then go weighted for your walking lunges, that's fine too. Just want to perform good quality movements. And then we'll go barbell step up, supersetted with the RDLs. That's a really good combo. I really like that superset. Um, dumbbell row is the last series. Is dumbbell row supersetted with weighted push-ups. So all of them are supersetting a bilateral movement with a unilateral movement so that we get both benefits of doing a compound movement with both extremities, and then also getting to work on any imbalances that are going on or any asymmetries that are going on in our system. So,
Yeah, a little bit of a lower body dominant day with some upper body thrown at the end.
well, you know how we do. We got to build a good foundation.
Exactly.
We always
Lower
promote
body
lower
takes
body
it.
stuff because
Yes.
everyone always it's always easy to avoid it.
Oh, simple. And then especially, upper body or upper body dominant days, and there's a little bit of lower body, but it's not that much.
Or everyone wants to talk about how much they can bench, and they start talking about squatting, and they have bad knees, they have bad hips, they have a bad back, they can't squat for this reason or that reason. So
Don't
we
have to
over here in
squat.
Think Fitness Life, we've been most effective with clients and people we come in contact with by forcing them to get comfortable in areas where they'd otherwise be uncomfortable.
Right. And I think that's where unilateral and bilateral. So one leg training versus both leg training like fall in. A lot of people love to perform bilateral movements. I think humans in general love to perform bilateral movements because they have more control. They feel
Yeah,
comfortable. So when we're talking about getting out of this comfort zone, this is what we're talking about of challenging the system to lateralize to one side and go, okay, you have to go to the left side or the right side, and then you got to figure out what to do with the other side if I'm standing on one side. It's important.
yeah. I think the major reason that comes to my head about importance is because when we talk about exercise here, we're talking about longevity and people living their best life and almost stepping out of being a gym monkey, but getting back to enhancing their life and their body for whatever. Maybe it's playing with their kids on the ground and being able to get up off the ground without any pain, or maybe it's just a nice healthy mobility when they get out of bed and they can function, or healthy sex life, or having the strength to lift things around the house, or to do the any work around the house, any landscaping, anything that you like to do. But maybe you're a skier or a snowboarder or a surfer, and you want to be able to have the strength, the core strength, and the stability associated with all those activities. So I think again, under that heading, I know that was a long rant, but under that heading, the importance that comes to my mind to reiterate to people is the number one predictor of injury is previous injury. The number two predictor of injury is asymmetries. We already have a natural asymmetry that we're born with in our bodies. Um, so there's things that we have to do to kind of offset that. And then if you're someone who adds more asymmetries to your routine, there's going to be extra work that you would need to do in the gym to help offset that. Say that you're a golfer and you just swing one way every time you're playing 18 holes of golf, right? Well, you're going to probably need to do some unilateral work to help make up for that imbalance. So
Or
that's
even,
where,
yeah, I mean, even let's say you don't have like a hobby or a golf or something, and you're just used to, your favorite sitting all day, right? We develop compensatory movements, patterns, and strategies on top of our asymmetries that just throw us into patterns of impingement or instability or compensation. So how do we correct for that? If we do have those patterns, you're having a client come down from his office with all these patterns, and you're just like, okay, I'm going to load you up and squat you. What's going to happen eventually if you don't correct those patterns and help them realize that first? Injury is going to happen down the road. It's guaranteed.
yeah. Yeah, there's a thing called functional scoliosis where your spine is deviated under tension, under load. So you might have perfect posture. You might walk with perfect alignment and you're fine. But the moment you're in the gym, you might be the person that for some reason gets this weird pain in your left side every time you work out, or you get your right lower back flaring up every time you squat, or you feel just a little bit of knee pain on the right side every time you do some type of movement. So it's issues like that where you notice the feedback happening on one side and not the other. That is a key indicator that somewhere in your system your body's compensating and not appropriately activated or um, really
Yeah.
stable on both sides.
Because what usually causes it, right? Maybe it's not cardio work. Maybe it's not like a rower, or it's usually when it's either high fatigue or higher load demand that the person maybe not adjusted or ready for. That's when you see these things that you mentioned come out. And then you're like, okay, well, at lighter weight, this person's fine. Walking into this gym, this person's fine. What just changed in the matter of minutes that made this person not okay? And then it's like, okay, now how do we strip this down, go back and say, how do I program appropriately for this person so they don't run into this again, and help them realize I need to balance the system out?
Yeah, I feel like on that note, it comes down to the brain. It's like, is the brain primed to stay under tension, or has it been primed to shut things down? And that's where the importance of a warm up and a cool down come into play. And like we've talked before, a cooldown doesn't need to involve 15 minutes, but it needs some type of deliberate effort. You need to deliberately be trying to get parasympathetic and get the tension to release from your body. Because if you just end your workout and then go on with your day, odds are you're still activating and tense in those areas. And then what happens? You go to bed, you go dormant for 8 hours, right? And then you wake up and try to work out the same way, but now you have a kink in your neck or a kink in your side because something's just been locked up and firing for the past 24 hours.
Yeah. And that'll happen. You're going to stay sympathetic. And I usually, all exercises you'll see this in, but more or less, I've probably seen it with more of these. I don't want to call them powerlifting exercise, right? But the big exercises, your deadlift, your squat, your bench. When
We'll
people
call it
really
compound
try to,
movements.
yeah, like they try to max exert, which is just fine, but they just stay in that locked position.
Mm.
Now, maybe that's, I we've been there, right? We did our bench days. It's bench day. We're gonna flat bench. We're gonna incline and possibly decline, and then throw flies in. So there's like 4 exercises right there with straight barbell or bilateral movements. I look back now. I'm like, I can't believe I did that. I mean, that works, but like for balancing of a system or variations, I was just like, that's not really optimal. You're just everything is bilateral, and same thing with legs, squat, leg press, RDLs. I mean, you miss out on so much opportunity if you're looking for muscle mass for growth doing single leg stuff.
Mm. I think talking about missing out, um, I think I can look back and look at the first time I went to clean up my squat form. And I was one of those persons where training was very much like a street trainer, where we didn't really have any formal training in middle school or high school. It was just like, okay, it's 45 minutes in the gym, go lift some weights. No instruction whatsoever, direction. um, the athletic trainer at the time would get people together so that he would show off how much he could bench. I remember that. It was like
Nice.
really weird. You know what I mean? Like what a big ego. But my first gym that I worked at, we had Smith machines. We didn't even have a real squat rack. So it would ended up being more of like I'd use those pre-made barbells that went up to like 110 or some dumbbell goblet squats. So it wasn't until Equinox when I really started formally barbell lifting. And so somewhere along that journey, I was like, okay, I want to start cleaning up my depth here. And it wasn't until I went for a pistol squat that I saw that I really can get to that depth on one leg. And on the other leg, I'm having some weird issues here that I had to look into and debunk, right? But it's I think it's really eye opening for people when they go and do a bilateral movement and then try something unilateral, even if it's as simple as a bench press, going from a barbell bench press to a single arm press, and you focus on that control. You focus on your lat staying in place, your serratus keeping your rib cage in place, and you pushing through the bench. You start to feel all the muscles associated with just working your chest, rather than people saying like, "Oh, we're benching, so we're just doing chest today." Like, no, we're working out. Like you're using more than just your chest, but you're probably only used to feeling your chest because of bad movement patterns. So I think it plays a huge role in taking a step back to take two forward. Whether it's you're trying to improve your squat or your deadlift or your bench, talking about those bigger movements, taking the time to do a unilateral movement can be really eye-opening and reveal either some areas where you need to focus on and improve on, but also reveal to yourself the mobility that you truly do have that you may have been limited because of a compensation on one side or the other.
Gotcha. Now, when you were doing the pistol squat, do you remember what leg was good and what leg was not so good, or is it
Left was good, right was bad.
would? Oh, interesting.
I have Osgood Schlatters, so it's like where the bone grew faster than the muscle, and I have that protrusion of the knee or the bone under my knee. And what happens is I've shown this to you before,
I got it too. Yeah, it's
but it's just the tibial tuberosity that has broken away so many times, and it repairs with bone. So it displaces even further away from the leg. So it was basically was under pain and had scar tissue that needed to be broken up in there. And I was just kind of naturally compensating, favoring a left side and not even appropriately activating my right side to get the appropriate depth. So because of that, I ended up getting other issues like a poor subtalar joint in my right ankle because I wasn't using any ankle mobility, right? I was trying to preserve the way my knee was moving because I was just like, oh man, I don't know where the pain's coming, but let's just hold it tight. So it created a lot of other hosts of issues, but the bottom line was it took me to just do one pistol squat to prove like, you know what, I can improve my depth, and I'm clearly limited and locked up because of me favoring one side to avoid pain on another.
yeah, and that's why I mean. The reason I ask is more just of a control thing. So or it's control or stability, right? So if you in our patterns we have certain things. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to be good on one leg versus the other, but it's just how people get good at being on certain things, right? So is your Osgood slather a cause of like overbearing on the right side? Um, that's how mine was created. I'm more obviously our right side dominant. Like that's there's more demand on the right leg, but it sacrificed stability. So it gets to the point where we're talking this bilateral versus unilateral. you're good with a bilateral squat. But as soon as you stripped it down to unilateral movement, it's like, what's going on? Because you have two halves of your body. One half's like good, one half's not. And thinking, where where eventually is that going to play a role in your bilateral movement? And that's how I look at it, because there's no right or wrong here.
No,
I love bilateral movements. I love unilateral movements. There's a
but
lot of things
because
on the internet that will
sorry,
be like, oh, that'll be like, you know, unilateral is not great. You can stay with bilateral, bilateral superior. I think they're all good, but I do think there's an importance of having them in programs at
yeah.
appropriate times to get a benefit from them and train characteristics of training and human movement that are important, and not just always do bilateral stuff.
It's like having a backdrop. So in the military, when they're doing field training and they're going somewhere and they're like learning a map and terrain, they'll have a backdrop. They'll have a point where they know they've gone too far and they need to reassess their map and find out how to get on the right direction again. And that's kind of the purpose of having something like that, like where the unilateral tests the bilateral and vice versa, so that my bilateral squat got way better once I identified the issue of what was happening. And then now I go back and I'll still do like single leg toe touches, lateral lunges, single leg step ups every now and then, just as kind of like a test, just to check in. And it's almost like a backdrop programmed in to make sure, well, let's just see, make sure we're able to activate and feel both legs evenly. Is anything weird going on with the ankles? Anything weird going on with the knee? And that's the beauty of programming in an all-inclusive manner, is you don't really want to just have one thing that you do for the rest of your life. You do one thing, it takes you a certain direction, and then from that point you get to analyze and assess and figure out what the appropriate measures are to figure out your next endeavor. But I do like having them somewhere in everyone's programs, whether it's a warm up, whether it's a cool down, whether it's in intra workout. I would say I use it more for warm up and assessment now than necessarily just an all out lift. But I will say
Really?
when I'm doing things for capacity training, which we'll get in later for conditioning, or like a triplanar day, I love unilaterals. I love doing like a suitcase step up or a single arm press, a reciprocal row, a landmine staggered press. I love um, the control and activation you need to get in your total body when you're just doing one movement pattern. Like when I can get someone on a bench and do just a single arm bench press, um, that sometimes is the best way to get someone's core firing than dead bugs. You
So
know?
you're utilizing it more than we think
Yes.
in stance position. So what he's saying is like, okay, if I'm standing in a split stance and doing a single arm landmine press, I mean, you're working single arm, but you're also working like a single leg stance. You're working a stance position of one leg in front. So one leg has to do something other than the other leg does, which I think are great exercises. And
Yeah.
that's where you can sneak it in, because you don't have to always just do unilateral. It's one of those things where if you, I love squat and deadlift. Those are my big bilateral movements. Everything else besides that, for legs and stuff, it's usually unilateral. Like single leg, I'm doing something. I'm working the gain to get stronger, so my squat and deadlift go up.
Yeah.
That's one aspect. Is like your strength of your numbers are going to go up as you can load certain movements depending on how you want to load them.
Yeah, it's very true. I will say that that is definitely an avenue. I will say that I do find that if it comes to someone who's solely basing their goals off strength, law of specificity, they
Yeah.
gotta just squat, they gotta just deadlift. I don't really want them doing unilateral stuff unless it's just for assessment, just to make sure they're activated properly. But again, that's when someone's only goal is to push
Correct.
more numbers, and that's typically, you don't even find that in sports. You typically see that more in like just Olympic athletes or
Well, there's
CrossFitters.
actually there's one concept which I really like. Oh, Cal Dietz did it he does it out of Minnesota. He can super max load a unilateral movement with a hand supported safety bar split squat to help the squat. So that's one avenue you can do it. If you want to
Okay.
get strong, you super max load it. Like we're going 100 plus percent, 110%. Obviously, you have a spotter, but your hands are supporting you. So you take the balance aspect out of it.
Mm,
And that's what I think you're saying. And I'm on board with it. If you're looking to gain pure strength, you're not trying to you're not trying to fight balance.
mm.
Like you don't want that as a factor. You just want to move this weight and get strong. So where he puts the hands on and you can drop down, you take balance out, you're just working pure strength. Hence you get stronger. But you would only do that maybe once a week as you're squatting 2 to 3 other times during that week if you want to get strong at the squat.
Well, it makes me think of I think it was Cressy. I think Cressy has a formula for what your unilateral squat should look like based on your bilateral squat numbers. Like he essentially said, it was either Cressy or Boyle, I forget.
I think you're right. I think it is Cressy. I just can't remember the what he says with it
And
because
it's
he does
something
the
like
same thing.
if you're able to
Similar.
squat 100 pounds, that means you should be able to squat 50 pounds on one leg.
Right.
And that's a very good rule of thumb because ideally when you're in the back squat, um, you're driving out of the pocket or out of the hole. You're driving out of there with both legs, both feet evenly, and you can check that with pressure plates, or you can take two scales that are calibrated, and you can film so you can see the lifter and the numbers on the scale and watch them, and you'll watch those numbers will shift. They'll shift to one side versus the other, but ideally when they can eccentrically load the system and it can teeter left and right because they're just kind of balancing, right? Figuring out where they are in space. But when they drive out, those things should be pretty damn even. And they're typically not. And, it's honestly something that I've thought of that should be applied more in a sports setting um, to really see how an athlete drives out of the pocket in any exercise. But at the same time, yeah, well, it's money, but at the same
Yeah,
time, they
my
don't even
force plates
really
cost a
care.
lot of money.
They
That'd
don't
be
even
awesome to have.
they don't even care. They don't even care about depth or anything like that. Like as long as you're doing like a quarter rep squat, that's going to be enough for a sprinter. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well, yeah, I agree because I mean they're never like half quarter up squats. Every coach is a little bit different. Every coach coaches a little bit different depending on research or what they're done with, and that's fine. I think
Because every organization has just like a team of strength and conditioning coaches
right
and research.
the schools that I or schools or teams I've seen that really get technical in depth are doing that stuff. They're looking at posture, force production, like they're measuring almost every aspect of it, and you see results. But eventually, it's hard because some of the athletes just they want to come in. They don't care like that 35% of their left calcaneal pressure is not compared to the right one. They're like, man, I just want to put 200 pounds on a bar and squat, and
It's
I want to run fast on Saturday's track meet. So
it's
it's
compliance.
crazy. Yeah, we like at coaches. I think we get like super into it. Like if because essentially we're trying to if you're a sports coach, you're trying to make a perfect machine function absolutely fine tuned where someone's just looking at like, hey, I just want to be able to run fast and catch a football or whatever. But
But
I agree with you.
But just like how you're trying to get a training effect out of somebody, it's not going to happen if you just constantly overload their system. And the same way with an athlete, like you have to, yeah. I think when it comes to coaching and implementing this stuff, it's another difficult game of not only figuring out what's best for each individual, but then figuring out how to translate that knowledge and information and that passion into the individual. It's tricky, it's like motivating somebody. It's trying to tie together what they like and what they want and what they need to do and put it in a way that is digestible for them. And you're only with someone an hour, so you can't really necessarily spend 20 minutes going over why something's important. But that's why it's so important to have a good relationship with your clients or your athletes because
I
it
think
goes along,
like athletes and clients are two different things, and I definitely want to
totally.
touch on like okay, we talked about athletes now like all right clients like because this is now a whole different realm. because
Yeah.
this is just longevity. It's not like they're going to go out and, they might go for runs and bike rides and stuff, but they're not like competing at high level competitions. I think it's more like, how do we keep these people healthy, walking, able to get up and down off the floor? How do we get them moving?
And I think you can fall into the trap of overwhelming somebody mentally and emotionally just by throwing too much at them too soon. And that's why I try to keep things really simple. I can try to keep things easy to remember, and I try to follow up with text messages or emails. And I think the most important thing is having an open line of communication, because at some point they're going to hit a wall. At some point they're going to be really frustrated. At some point they're going to be, perseverating over something that bothered them about the session, that something that they couldn't do maybe, or something that they don't know why they have to do. And you want there to be an open line of communication. I don't care if I know the person and know what they're going to do on the weekend. I still say it all the time, just like, let me know if you need anything. It just opens the doors, so like one day when they do need something, they'll feel like they can approach you, and it won't be held in their system and locked away. It'll be easy, something that you can approach and talk about. Like I've had it, I do it with food all the time. I'm coaching people on nutrition changes, and I don't always get the best barometer of where someone's at and what information they can apply and what information is just too much for them. But I've gotten a lot better at basically making it a two-way street and getting them to talk, so that I can start to mitigate some of that stress that doesn't need to be put on their system.
And I think, that's the way to hit it. Go is simple, right? So when we're kind of like programming for someone new, I don't throw them with three or five single leg exercises. I keep it pretty bilateral. I get them movement down. I might throw some single leg stuff in there because I want to work on frontal plane control and balance and all the systems for functional gait. But if you give them too much and too much cueing, they're going to be like, what is going on? Now on the other side, there's clients that I've had for years that I'm like, all right, we're going to do predominantly single leg stuff for this day because it's going to help you on the next day. And they're like, well, I know the position. Like I gotta set it. But as soon as they know, they're like, oh, how come I set up on a front foot elevated split squat and I didn't feel right? I was like, because you didn't have your weight shifted over to one side. You didn't have your this or that going on to make sure you're standing on single leg. So it's for people starting out, minimal single leg stuff and then build into it. But it does also help our neurological system be able to, okay, can I shift to the left side, stay on the left side? Can I go to the right and do the same thing? That's with lower body. And then with upper body, okay, can I shift? And now can I move my arms and control my rib cage?
Mm.
And I love it because the next part of it is, minus the strength part, is the stability. Like you're creating stability on one side of our asymmetrical body, and they have to figure out how to organize themselves over to that side. You on your left, you're good with your squat, but on the right side, organization wasn't there for you. So you're like, what's going on? How come I can't squat? But
Mm.
once you found out how to organize yourself over to that right side, you were like, down and up, I got this pistol squat. Like,
Yeah.
okay, now my squat's probably going to improve. And that's what we're going to use a lot of single leg activities and unilateral exercises for,
Mm.
to train that one side so they get better. And of course, you want them to be good on one foot, and just in case like they're taking a step and walking is unilateral, and they have to step up on a step, but it's slippery, or someone spilled a drink and they have to be on their left leg for 10 seconds more than they're used to. I need them comfortable on that.
Yeah. Well, before we go into conditioning, top five unilateral exercises.
Top five. um, Front foot elevated split squat, step up, or step down. That's like number two. Single leg RDL or single leg deadlift. Two more. um, I would say a traditional split squat, and the last one. Ooh, see, those are like the big ones that I use right there. Lateral lunge. So like those are like the big five that I'll program in. I don't try to get too fancy with other kind of stuff, but if I get them strong in those positions, I know they're pretty good.
I would say my top five would be single leg RDL, like you, lateral lunge, like you, step up, like you, and then what comes to mind is a dumbbell row and a half kneeling single arm press.
You know what's crazy, man? I'm just thinking lower body here. Like I was just thinking, like you just brought in the
Well,
dumbbell row. I'm like, damn, I just missed like completely the upper body.
to be fair, it's like most people can perform a dumbbell row or a single arm press without any issues.
Yeah, no,
Rarely do you
that's still
see.
important though. That's huge because you gotta center the thorax and you gotta make sure the scap's moving right. Like
Just
I'm
gonna
thinking
say,
just our stance.
like sometimes you'll just see people leaning to one side and not even engaging their left oblique and just
Yeah.
pressing from this tilted
Oh,
position. But most often than not, we're dealing with the lower body when we're working unilateral to help expose
right.
weaknesses
Yeah.
in the foot or the ankle or the knee or the hip. So I'm with you, and I'm
But
happy that you went a different way and brought up a lot more of the unilateral ones for the lower body because I forgot some of those.
so I'd probably have to think about that one. If I had to pick one unilateral exercise that I think was most beneficial.
Oh, well, that's a different question. I
No,
was
man, that's what I'm
asking
thinking now. Like, okay, do I do upper body or do I do lower body?
well,
I would
I
probably do
have
like
mine. I'll give you 30 seconds, but I have mine. If
go
I had
yours.
one unilateral exercise for anyone to do, um, based upon any goal, based upon any starting point that would be most beneficial for their body, I'd have to go with a single arm overhead carry.
Ooh, I like it. I was gonna go single arm or no half kneel single arm press because it's gonna teach you to push, exhale, and it's still getting stance through the legs. I
Neil,
mean, there's no right or wrong here. I'm just
instead of
thinking like that.
overhead.
No, it's just horizontal, like a cable press.
Okay, okay, yeah, yeah, half kneeling. Oh, I like that.
That's a good question. Like,
That is a
because
good
there's so many
exercise.
things. Because yours is like you got to control the rib cage going this way, that way.
and s- and
Yeah.
and maintain that tension, maintain activation as you move, which
No,
I think is
yours
hard for
wins. You know
people.
why? Yours wins. You have walking. You have the ultimate. You have gait pattern in there. That's it right
Uh,
there.
but at the
Uh,
same time, like yeah, because you're reciprocating. You're keeping that left shoulder blade back while you're extending
I
in the
know,
right.
but you're getting the legs. You're getting the hips to go back and forth while they have to deal with something overhead and control of rib cage.
Well, some people who can't walk would definitely agree that you're the better exercise.
So I think that's the beauty of unilateral and bilateral. Like there's so many options, but we get people good at realizing load on one side versus the other and dealing with it.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to conditioning. We want to talk about capacity today.
Good
Um,
old capacity.
aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity. We'll brief upon basically the best way to understand this is your floors and ceilings. Your capacity is essentially your floor, and your ceiling is threshold training that will help improve your capacity. Um,
Yeah, I mean conditioning is great, but I think it gets lost, right? I don't know the definition. Like if you were to ask someone the definition of conditioning, they'd be like, "Oh, it's working really hard," right? Now, for people, it's different um, because it's more like it's your physical and mental ability to utilize your fitness to meet the demands of the environment. So, a sprinter who doesn't need to have like crazy conditioning, but they got to be conditioned to sprint 100 meters as fast as they can, rest, 5 minutes and do it in another heat. Whereas conditioning for an MMA fighter is like 5 minutes go. It's never ending. So just to clear that up, but like we're talking today, capacity is going to be your ability to what you can hold for fitness and what you can output
ready? I found a definition from Merriam Webster.
for capacity or conditioning.
Conditioning, but it plays a role into physical fitness.
Let's hear it.
The process of training to become physically fit by a regimen of exercise, diet, and rest.
Whew, I
A
like that.
simple form of learning involving the formation, strengthening, or weakening of an association between a stimulus and a response.
Ooh,
So they're
that
also talking about deconditioning.
that one's even better
Yeah, I know. That's a really good definition of it.
because that's looking at as a whole, a system condition. We're conditioning our human system.
Yeah, and I think the key point is that you're not just doing a workout based around conditioning just to get through that workout, you're trying to improve the way that you can activate those hormones and those associations of the body working together, um, so that you can again improve better overall. So a conditioning, whether it's a positive or negative, is literally getting adaptations, training effects, overloading the stimulus, overloading the system enough so that you get an allosteric response, and your body makes changes.
Yeah,
So
that's
we
what we
would
want.
always have. I remember having soccer. We'd have 2 weeks of conditioning training before we got started with formal practice, and formal practice was always so much easier. It was just an hour and a half a day. But conditioning, the 2 weeks of conditioning, was 2 a days for 2 weeks, and the idea was that we were basically overloading our system so that we would improve.
Yeah,
And it was funny because I remember learning early on, like it takes 2 weeks to get ramped up and into shape, so to speak, but it can take you 1 week to fall off your routine and have that
see
rock
you
fall
later.
back downhill.
Body's not going to keep the adaptations, but when the beauty of when you have sports is you're going into the week one or like practice, you're like, man, I feel good. Like this game is nothing because you've already put your system through that conditioning and it has the capacity to do that. You're still using it, so you're not going to lose that capacity. You might lose a little bit, but you're going to be able to maintain that. And then they'll do like, I don't know about soccer, but for football, they did like a couple days of conditioning before the games just to keep it. And it was more or less it wasn't sprints. It's more capacity. It's more building. Now that you look back, I used to love doing sprints. Like, why can't we just do sprints for conditioning? But it would be there to be capacity work to build that aerobic system because you've already done your sprints and work in practice.
Yeah. And another big piece of this conditioning side of things is um, mobilizing fats and carbohydrates for fuel. Is you're getting your body more associated with um, burning its fuel storages for appropriate activity, whether it includes oxygen or not. But that being said, why don't you go ahead and tell us what aerobic capacity is and how would one go about improving it?
Yeah, so aerobic capacity and work capacity is like the same definition in my book. It is, the bottom of a pyramid if you're looking at it, like that's the base you want to build. It's your ability to produce ATP using oxygen, so the aerobic process, but have that turn over and over and over. So you're always producing ATP, which is energy, so you can run basically your metabolic system to gain energy quicker. So if you don't train that and you jump right into more anaerobic stuff, you're going to have power, but you won't have capacity. You won't have the ability to repeat those constantly over and over again because your system's not trained to use oxygen as quickly and turn it into ATP. And that's what all we're looking at. Like, how quick can you take air, run it through your mitochondria to make ATP and other substrates to run to your muscles to be like, okay, shorten and lengthen, shorten and lengthen, repeat, repeat, repeat. If you don't build that mitochondria capacity up, you're just going to stall out eventually.
You're going to start hitting walls. You're going to start
Yeah,
redlining. Yeah, pretty
yeah.
early on, pretty easily. And
It's
it's
it's I
going to be
use like
harder for your body to recover in between rounds and stuff.
what's a gas tank reference. So if you have a regular car, it's 10-gallon gas tank, and you're running, you're fast, you're driving that. Eventually, it's going to burn out after, if you're going mile laps, it's going to burn out. But if you increase your capacity and now you have a 15, 20-gallon tank, you can go longer and more efficient and use fuel better. So that's the way I tell it to people. It's just you're building a bigger tank to
Mm.
store, to have more ability to work in. And that's where people fall short. If they don't build that aerobic or work capacity base, they're going to get to a point where their system they're using, strength, speed, and aerobic, can't keep up repetitively. And sports, as we know, most things are repetitive. So you
Yeah.
have to do it over and over and over again. You'll lack that. And
And
what
that's when
happens?
you'll start to see, like, even in professional athletes, and probably more so when people get back to their sports because they've taken so much time off. But you'll start to see them slouch or just not able to hold that and maintain that posture. It's because it's taking
Yeah.
so much energy to properly maintain good posture and good form. So by the time they're fatigued, whether it's fourth quarter or maybe it's just the third quarter, you can tell that that athlete is either just redlining because
Yep.
they're overexerting themselves, or they're just not properly conditioned
Because
for whatever reason.
that system is trying to do the best it can, and then postures. That's where I was thinking next. Is like, okay, what happens? Our posture goes when you hit fatigue because your body's
Now
like,
your breathing mechanics are so
oh,
thrown out of whack.
now you're going to build poor movement patterns because of compensatory things you're going to try to do because you're not good at
You're sort of wasting energy.
aerobic, and then it leads us back to injuries because now you have compensation patterns and can go back to unilateral, bilateral. So work capacity is like huge because we want to keep people healthy. The last thing I need is someone going for runs, say long runs, and all of a sudden every time mile 10 they're like my hamstring, my lower back, I'm starting to like break down. It's not, well, running does that eventually, but what is the problem? It's like once they get there, their body's fatigued and it wants to shut down and get lazy. So it's like, now what do we do? Let's just throw in old patterns, pain, injury. So how do you get that person to be like, I need to increase my capacity when I get here so I learn how to not to have bad posture?
So then go ahead and talk to us about anaerobic capacity. What's the difference there? Just the N? No, I'm just kidding.
Literally just the end. So anaerobic capacity is just it's the same thing. It's capacity, but you're having the capacity to do anaerobic work over and over again. So it's repetitive. So if you're doing 10-second sprints with 40-second recovery, the ratio of recoveries are 1 to 4 there. It might not be all power because your intensity is going to drop a little bit. You're still going to you have the capacity to go 2 reps, 3 reps, 4 reps, 5 reps, 6 reps. A lot of conditioning for sports will do, I don't know for soccer, but for football, we used to do 110 sprints, and it was basically glycolytic capacity. So could you do 16 110-yard sprints with 45-second rest in between? It shows you how well your body can turn over that energy in quick demand. And that's all that really is. So when you train capacity, it's more like you're training the volume of that aspect.
So will improving my aerobic capacity improve my anaerobic capacity? And vice versa? Will improving my anaerobic capacity improve my aerobic?
Aerobic capacity improvement will improve anaerobic because that system's always running underneath. We're always breathing in, so there's always O2
Tra-
trying to transfer
transfer.
electron transfer chain and get ATP to be made. If you can, right? So we have the Tabata studies. Dr. Tabata, who did the 20 seconds on 10-second rest. You can get an aerobic conditioning effect, but only to a certain point. So
Okay.
you can't do Tabatas and then try to go run a marathon because
Yeah.
there's not the
Of
uh,
correlation of oxygen usage.
there's not as much capacity. Like you're going to see some VO2 and oxygen uptake because you're working hard, but it's not going to be give you aerobic endurance qualities.
Okay. So
That's why
then
on most things it's usually aerobic and work capacity GPPs are built first because
mm,
they'll help every system above it.
improve to handle the next programs
Exactly.
and
Because I mean
ultimately to perform in
you can
tournaments or games, match
yeah.
days. So
And
go ahead and describe how one trains for improving their anaerobic capacity.
anaerobic or aerobic?
Well, didn't we already do aerobic?
Not
No,
really.
okay, let's
It's
do
just
both.
training. So I
Let's
say
do
like
both.
let's call it work capacity on this one. I'd probably just say like keep it more aerobic. So like if someone wants to starting off building that work capacity, it's going to be, you know, longer distances with volume. So volume before intensity, right? Volume, high reps, high counts before you're like 95 to 100% max sprint. So things that I like are like 100-yard 100-yard tempo runs. Tempo runs are great. They build capacity. You don't have to always be running, but it's like 100 yards at a, you could be 80% and then walk to the 25 yard and back and then go again. Or you can sprint it. Sprint, run 100 yards, walk to the 25, walk back to the goal line, sprint. You can do um, stuff with med ball tempo stuff where it's durations 30 seconds plus, high reps, but you're not going crazy volume.
We actually did have a weekly workout where we made people build an aerobic base by running hard for 10 minutes and then stopping and doing some push-ups and some side planks and then going back to running. We did do that type of workout for a weekly workout, but we also did a workout where you would do max push-ups, 10 squat jumps, and sprint for 75 yards and walk back and repeat 6 times, which is going to be more beneficial to improving work capacity.
Which one is?
Or are they both going to be? Yeah.
They're both going to be.
And okay, so let me
Because
just.
you could,
I answered my own question. I just was trying to toss up an easy one, but I guess what I'm trying to point out for people is the two different workouts and the way they're going to improve your capacity. So one's going to improve more of your flooring, again, like that run 10 minutes is going to improve the aerobic base and your ability to turn over oxygen. And then the other one's just going to help improve your ceiling, improve that max effort and your anaerobic capacity, essentially. So yeah, they both do improve your
yeah,
capacity. And
I would, for a beginner, I would do more of the first one,
yeah,
10-minute, right? Because you can do 10 to 15-yard sprints and build up volume as you go in the work, but I wouldn't be like, because 10-yard, 15-yard sprint's not long. It's not a big duration. So you could probably do 20, 30 reps if you really wanted to. But I do like building with higher volume to make people, so people understand fatigue. If they
right.
don't hit fatigue, where are they going to be when they do? And that's the big thing. Even workout, lifting, running, you name it. What happens when they hit fatigue? As you said, posture goes. So I need this person to realize what they're going to do when they hit a fatiguing moment. That's why I'm a little hesitant at first to be like, okay, we're going to do, sprints, quick sprints, but like repeat it, because that doesn't really get people to fatigue unless I do high volume.
Yeah.
So I'll personally choose things like tempo runs, stuff at like 60 seconds in duration at a lower intensity. So they're realizing, okay, how do I deal with this as we're going over 30 seconds? Higher tempo fan bike things for 60 seconds. Those are always fun, even at about a 60, 70%. And then you can build on top of that. That's probably one of my go-tos, like 60 seconds on a fan bike, not all out, at like 70%, rest 60, maybe 60 to 90 seconds, four or
And hop
five of
on it.
those. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll really notice the fatigue just by getting a repetition in of you did it for 2 to 3 minutes and you do it again or a minute like you said, but getting to rest and then try it again, you'll really notice how your system fatigues.
Yeah.
So is that pretty much wrap up conditioning? All we want to talk about with work capacity?
Yeah, for work capacity, I think it's a general, like, okay, this is the first thing to build, whether you're lifting or you're trying to be a running or a good athlete on the other side of lifting. Same thing with lifting, volume before intensity. So build that base, because you can still build aerobic base lifting. Now it's not going to be like running, but if you're up higher rep ranges, you're going to be working in 30 seconds plus, or we have in our GAPP where it's circuit after circuit after circuit, or movement after movement, 15 reps here, 15 reps here, 15 reps here, 15 reps, rest it. That's, total time could be around 2 minutes, building your ability to use oxygen for the muscles to be able to repeat that.
Yeah, and I think it's just important to mention that there's no one size fits all, and that's why we kind of talk about the strengths and weaknesses to both sides. Like it's the same thing with unilateral versus bilateral. Like we
Hmm.
can't just, unfortunately, we can't just say like this is great for everyone to do. Go do this. Like it's really about figuring out what's best for your system and bringing that awareness into your day and into your body and taking care of your health in that way. And if you need someone's help, that's why there's trainers at every gym, and it's helpful to get a second opinion, a bird's eye view, looking at how your system performs, someone with experience. And then also, it's nice to not have to always be in the driver's seat all the time. And now you get to just perform and let someone else kind of steer the ship, and you kind of learn, or maybe you adjust in a totally different fashion after your experience. But it was a data point that helped direct you, regardless of whether it was something you went along with and kept training, or it was just something you did once or twice. And even with conditioning, like not everyone needs to improve their aerobic capacity. Not everyone needs to improve their anaerobic capacity. But odds are, if you're a beginner, and you're new to taking care of yourself, or if you have a lot of goals that you're still trying to achieve, you probably do want to improve your aerobic capacity. Or if you're someone who hits a wall a lot in your workouts, you probably want to improve your aerobic capacity. But
Yep.
there isn't a one size fits all approach, and that's why we kind of talk about both sides. Talk about bilateral and unilateral. We talk about capacity in terms of aerobic and anaerobic, and the strengths and weaknesses to both.
And even well, yeah, yeah, and there's so many. We just kind of like we don't even like hit the surface of it. But I'd say for most people, like a 2 to 3 block a year, like GPP or aerobic cycle is probably going to be pretty good for them. And then the rest of them, you can dabble in anaerobic, alactic, lactic. I mean, there's so many methods you can do. The best thing about the aerobic system is it keeps its duration. So I mean, you can train it and you're going to keep those training qualities for a long time. We're talking about over a month, 30 plus days. You're going to keep those capacities. And of course, in your other your blocks, you're training anaerobic capacity, but you're still getting some spillover to aerobic capacity because it's still working. You're
Right.
fine. And
Right.
that's what I tell a lot of people. You can do. There's so many different ways you can program it, but usually like once or twice a year, big GPP aerobic capacity work cycle. I'm hitting, so I know I have that capacity, and then I sprinkle it in there.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time, and I wanted us to be able to get 5 minutes to talk about our last topic, and it's eating on the go. Super important to bring up and mention to help put things in perspective for people. And when we say eating on the go, I'm literally talking about everything other than buying whole foods and preparing them yourself. So we're talking about buying in a grocery store, talking about buying in a food from a restaurant, buying fast food, buying from a gas station. It's super important that we realize we're only as good as the quality of um, cells and ions and vitamins and nutrients that we're putting in our body. We talked about regeneration a while back in a different podcast about the way that our skin, falls off of us and recreates itself, and things like our organs recreating themselves cell by cell. We talk about autophagy, the way that our body helps do a little house cleaning by kind of survival of the fittest on the cellular level. And our where do we assume that our body's recreating it from? There's not like I don't know. I don't need to make a funny joke because it wouldn't even be that funny, but it's coming from everything we put in our body. We literally have a tube that's on the outside of our body from our mouth to our butt, and it interacts with all this dead animals and plants that we stuff down the tube to uh, help um, break down the compounds and then use them where the body needs, whether it's in for proteins, or maybe it's repairing tissue, or it's improving hormone regulation and function, or creating more serotonin or dopamine, or recycling. Excuse me, your body can't make more dopamine than it already does, but it'll make L-dopa. That's different. It's a precursor. But so I guess my point is that since your body's constantly interchanging its cells and its ions and its vitamins and minerals, is it really depends on the quality of resources you're giving it. If you think about building a house, you're not going to go find some driftwood by the beach to build your foundation. You're going to get some solid wood, some I don't know. I don't even know. I'm not going to pretend like I know the type of wood that would go into a foundation because
An
now
oak.
it's more concrete. But I guess my point is that you would want whether maybe you're doing a restoration project. We'll think of it like that. You're restoring your house. You're restoring your body. You're not going to pick shitty quality materials to build your house with. Same thing with your body. Your body doesn't want poor quality materials to repair itself with, and really that's what I want to get at here with this topic, eating on the go, is that it might look like food to you, but it was prepared in a factory. It might look like food to you, but it was factory farmed and processed, and now it looks like this beautiful piece of food. So it's really the wild wild west out there. I mean,
Right.
companies are the highest paid psychologists in the world. Usually are people who are working on bliss point studies in terms of figuring out the bliss point of a food for its saltiness, its sweetiness, its tanginess, its crunchiness, so that someone keeps eating it. Just like we want to create, I don't know, just like any other business that wants to create lifelong customers. I don't say that we do that here because we like to empower people. We like to empower people to realize that you don't need us. Everything you need is already on this earth, right? It's like a multiple
Lifelong
choice test.
exercisers and healthy livingers.
Yeah,
That's what we want.
right. But there's definitely a lot of businesses out there that want a lifelong customer. They want to build that into their portfolio for profit margins. And
And it,
same thing
yeah,
with the food industries. They're trying to market and catch us young. They're trying to create lifelong consumers out of us. And it's really easy to do because we're lab rats. We're really easy to trick with food, right? Because we're hungry. We want the food. So it's again the wild wild west out there in terms of looking at food and then taking a step back from your desires and saying, is that a smart choice for me? What's the process of the food that's going into that? What is the sourcing where that restaurant's getting their food from? What's the process on the farm where they're getting that food from? All this stuff plays a role into the quality of meat and vegetables that we're consuming, and it's just really sad that we are where we are. They have statistics out there. I'm not going to misquote them, but somewhere between 30 and 50% of our environmental pollution is due to the fact that we take organic material out of the soil, and organic material ends up in dumps in the trash and not getting
I've
back
heard
into
that.
the ground.
Yeah.
So it never gets the opportunity to recycle back into the dirt. And if anyone out there has a compost bin, you know how it works. You throw dirt in there, you throw whole foods in there, and all of a sudden you think this trash can would pile up, but no, it decomposes itself, gets smaller and smaller every time, and you have fresh soil, not just dirt. Which a lot of times we go outside and there's this brown hard stuff that's dirt. There's nothing living in it. So how can we get anything to grow that's living that we can consume that would help us live better? So
Right.
this is a long rant, and I appreciate you being patient with me here, Menchie. But yeah, eating on the go is a super important topic because it it's either leading people to success in the terms of the way they've maneuvered and how to construct eating on the go in terms of not being able to prepare every meal at every moment when they're about to eat it. So things like meal prepping. Um, or food delivery services that are approved, but it's also going to lead to people's demise. So it's either going to lead to your success or your demise, whether you figured out a way to maneuver around it and eat whole, organic, non-factory made, non-preservative enhanced food. Um, and even in talking about meat, I think it's another important topic I want to brief on real quick. But factory farming leads to poor quality meat. I mean, when a cow or an animal knows it's going to be slaughtered, it sends a lot of fear and hormones through the system and spoils the meat. Happens a lot with pigs when people do boar hunting. But it's the same way that
Why you gotta gut it quick, process
exactly
that meat.
you got to. I
No,
say that nice.
it
Good
does, yeah.
example.
It's the same thing when deer hunting, if because cortisol is released when you shoot it, it goes into stress. It's crazy to say, you want it I want it to go down as quick as possible. And you want a clean shot so it's not stressing, so it ruins the meat.
And it's
So
more humane. It's
yeah,
more
and
humane.
like these animals, it's not like they know, all right, this guy's coming to get me. Like I think they know they're in a 2 by 2 cage. Like this is stressful. They're not surviving. Like that's it. Like they're
Yeah,
probably primed for stress, which
yeah.
is good for the companies because what does stress do? You have
Fat.
stress, food, it's fat. And that's what my biggest like is quality. Just be smart about the quality of stuff you put in your body. If you have to eat on the go, like try to make the best choice possible.
Everyone does. That's the thing, and that's why this topic so important. Is because you're really trying to protect yourself from getting sold into a purchase that's impulse. It's the
Yeah.
same. It's the same way that people need to think about the way that they can have self control over not having infidelity. Right? Like this, you don't constantly just have sex with every woman that looks like amazing. You don't pursue every woman that looks and simulates this biological response in you because you're smarter than that and you know who's at home or who you love and what you don't want to sacrifice. It's the same thing with food. You got to bring that same awareness and control into your food system
It
and
seems
recognize
people
desires and the difference between your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex. One of them is emotional, primal, instinctual processing, and one of them is higher thinking processing.
I feel like the emotional always wins. It's that like it's like,
Yeah,
oh, emotion. This, these Doritos, emotion, good. Prefrontal cortex, like, I don't care. Like shut down. Like it's amazing. But that's
yeah,
what it is. It
yeah,
is like with food, it's something different with us. And
yeah,
we have to learn to be better.
yeah.
Every person has to learn to be better of like, okay. And it's not going to get easier because there's more junk and garbage being put and created, invented every single day to make money. So
There are people out there fighting the good fight, like Dr. Mark Hyman and a lot of groups he works with, and a lot of doctors he works with. They are working to change the legislation so that food companies have to be more uh, transparent, so that there's less lobbying from these food companies that are controlling big pharma and controlling our food system and our healthcare system. But we are the richest nation in the world, and yet we spend the top 50, or we're lowered down to between 50 and 60 on healthcare. Like, or excuse me, we're the fattest nation in the world, and we spend the most healthcare in the world on or spend the most on healthcare in this nation. So that's a business that's wrong. Like, how do you not look at that department and say something's wrong here? How are we spending the most, but we're ranked 50 and 60th in health? We need to change it, right? But
and
this comes down
unfortunately,
to money and control and political power. But like I said, they're working to change some of this stuff so that it won't take as much mental energy to educate yourself and have the self control in those scenarios. You'll start to actually be able to trust your local farmers markets or your
yeah,
local produce stores. But then another funny thing too is the way that our food system's set up with COVID. There was mass quantities of milk that had to go bad and thrown out. There were mass quantities of meat that from animals that were slaughtered that had to rot and had to throw it out. Why? Because these big companies have contracts with these other distributors, and it's only packaged in a certain way for these large distributors and not for the smaller individual. Or like maybe they could have broken them up into smaller individual sized packages and start just feeding people, since a lot of people are hungry and millions are on food stamps even more now because of COVID. So it's just sickening to see that there's people over here dying because they can't get milk and meat, and there's companies over here that are throwing milk and meat away because of the improper system that's put in place. So
well, and the other side of this whole COVID thing, it's like, why do you think this country's getting hit so hard? We're
obesity.
say 40 to 50%. I think in the next, I think I read in the next like 5 years, we might be at like 50% of this country's obese, which is like disgusting, right? That's not a good numbers, and people want like are thinking like, why is this a big problem? Well, this I don't want to get too much like this new virus attacks the immune system. If you are overweight and you have poor health, it's unfortunate. These foods are causing this. Like food is causing people
And
to
another
deal with this
major
work.
thing that plays a role into that is the fact that Roundup and glyphosate is actually an antibiotic that's sprayed on every single thing. So a lot of times people have these low dosages of antibiotics in their system, and their immune system has been functioning ever so slightly, but constantly for months, years at a time. And then when a real foreign invader comes in, the immune system's too weak. It hasn't improved over time. It's gotten weaker over time. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things to think about here, eating on the go in terms of our food system, but also the quality of nutrients and vitamins that you're putting in your body that your body's choosing to replenish itself with. So plays a major role. And we're out of time, but my quote food for thought for the day that I think is very applicable into this topic is, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. That's how you get around all this stuff. You got to plan to have unilateral movements in to help your bilateral movements, and vice versa. You got to plan to write out what your conditioning workout looks like so that you stay the course when you're in the middle of doing it, because you know everyone's going to be like, let's cut it short today. And you got to plan when you know you're going to be out there in the middle of the day and you're going to need something to eat for lunch, and you don't want to just eat something because they're trying to sell you more and more of it, trying to eat something that's going to benefit your system.
Be aware, plan, always have the next step ahead of you ready. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, because we're an ever-changing organism that is constantly being pulled in directions. We just got to pull it in the right direction on all aspects of everything we do.
And that's that, folks. See you next week. Thanks for listening. We hope you gained something from this episode. Our mission is to help people live their best life, both physically and mentally. Check out thinkfitnesslife.com for additional resources and schedule a complimentary assessment with one of us. We're always here to help.